So what we're going to talk today are modes of third-person narration. These are the people telling the story. We learned about first person, second person, and third person. If you remember this video, you can play this song. It's going to be on your lesson tiles after you're done watching this if you'd like to watch to refresh your memory. So with dialogue and narration, it's usually the characters' voices when we're talking about dialogue and when someone's narrating. When we're talking about narrators, we're talking about their voice, and they're causing the narration of the story. So if we say, she said, hey you, she said is part of the dialogue, and hey you is what she said in the story. We're interested in the narration part, who's telling the story. So with third-person narration, the narrator tells his or her story, their side of the story and how it happened. There are three types of third person. The first one is limited, omniscient, and objective. So one more time, I want you to say it when I say it. Limited, omniscient, and objective. So what's the difference between these three? We have the characters in the story, and then we have the narrator telling the story. If the character's thinking, I feel sad, then the narrator is going to tell us he felt sad. And we need to see if the character's inner thoughts are being narrated. So if we know what the character's thinking, and does the narrator tell us or reveal those thoughts and feelings? When we're talking about third person limited, this means that the narrator reveals thoughts and feelings of one character. So we are really getting an insight on one character when the story is being told from the outside. For example, Chris liked Elma since the 3rd grade, but he had never found the nerve to tell her. But one sunny day, Chris said to Elma, so you want to go with me? Elma blushed and said, okay. Chris smiled. So we're getting his internal thoughts. So remember, the word internal means inside his thoughts. And it's only limited to Chris. That means we can only tell what Chris's thoughts are, and that's why it's called third person limited. So here in this situation, we have Chris thinking, I like Elma. And then he says, so you want to go with me? And Elma says, okay. So we're only understanding one character's thoughts, and that character is Chris. We don't know what Elma is thinking. That's why this is called third person limited. When we're talking about third person omniscient, omni means all, and cent means knowing, like in scientist. So when you put them together and you get the word omniscient, we're going to know more than one character's thoughts or feeling because the word omni means all. So pay attention to omni, all, and omniscient means all-knowing. We know all of the character's thoughts. So this example changed now. Chris had liked Elma since the 3rd grade. Little did he know that Elma liked him too. So now we're getting insight on Chris, and we're getting insight on Elma's thinking. So we know all characters' thoughts. They both admired one another from afar and waited. One day, Chris said to Elma, so you want to go with me? Elma felt her stomach sink. She couldn't believe it. Blushing, she said, okay. Chris smiled. So now we got an insight on how Elma was feeling during this interaction. Her stomach sank, and she couldn't believe it. We wouldn't know that if it was limited. Now that we're talking about third person omniscient, we can tell what both characters are thinking. So now Chris is thinking, I like Elma. And she says, oh, I like Chris. This is all within their thoughts. If we're talking about omniscient, we know what both characters are thinking. And then he says it out loud, and she says it out loud. And that means in third person omniscient, we can tell what all characters are thinking. When we're talking about third person objective, we don't know the internal thoughts of any character. We have to infer the thoughts and feelings based on the actions or dialogue they have with one another. So only by their actions and words can we really draw a conclusion or infer what they're feeling. So now here's the example, all changed to third person objective. Chris slowly walked up to Elma with his hands behind his back. "So you want to go with me?" he said nervously. Elma blushed. "Okay." Chris smiled. So in this instance, we don't know what Chris is thinking, and we don't know what Elma's thinking, but we can use the text clues to help us. If he says it nervously, we can infer that he's nervous about the situation. He had his hands behind his back, so we can tell in this instance physically that his hands are showing that he's nervous when he approaches her. She blushed, so we can tell that she was shy or she was embarrassed. And then he smiled, so we can tell that he's elated or happy at the end of this. So using those text clues with third person objective, we can really tell what the thoughts are, but the narrator does not tell us what they're thinking. So now Chris says it out loud, and Elma says it out loud in dialogue, but we do not get any thoughts when we're reading a third person objective story. So to tell the difference, we need to really focus on the narration, how the narrator tells the story, and the strategies that the narrator uses. So what we're going to do when we're working alone is circle any narrated thoughts or feelings and count each character's thoughts. Only third person has these modes to them, so you won't use this when you're working with first or second person. The signal words are listed here. If you'd like to pause it, you can, to go over the different signal words when you're looking at third person. One example that I'm going to give to you, and we're going to work through together, is this one here. It says, "Arthur could not hear his stomach grumbling and looked around quickly to see if anyone else had noticed. None of his classmates looked up. He thought, 'I'm glad nobody heard that.' He looked up at the clock and saw that it was 10:30. He had 45 minutes until lunch. It seemed like an eternity." So for the point of view, I'm going to go gather my clues, and I know that the character's name is Arthur, and he could hear his stomach grumbling and looked around quickly to see if anyone else had noticed. We are in Arthur's head where he could hear his stomach grumbling. But this is what the narrator's telling us that's happening outside of his body, his physical appearance, that he's looking around quickly to see if anyone else has noticed. None of his classmates looked up. So this is nothing that's thought. This is all happening in the story. But here we go. He thought. So we're deep inside Arthur's brain. "I'm glad nobody heard that." And you look up at the clock. So this is the narrator telling us the actions. He had 45 minutes until lunch. It seemed like an eternity. This is also Arthur's thoughts. It seemed like an eternity. So taking an understanding of Arthur and what he's thinking, we can tell what Arthur's thinking. Those are our clues. So it's third person limited. We're only limited to Arthur. We don't know what any of the other students are thinking. So that's why we circled third person limited here. And the clues that we have the ones that we circled, that he thought, and the narrator is not a character in the story. We're kind of looking in from above. Only Arthur's thoughts and feelings are known. We don't know any of the other characters and how they're feeling. So for this example, today was a big day. It was their mom's birthday. Caitlin had worked hard all afternoon baking a cake and decorating it. After adding candles to the top, she thought, "I hope Mom likes it." In the other room, Caitlin's brother Stephen was making a birthday card. He was very excited and thought this was the best card he ever made. That night, after dinner, Caitlin and Stephen presented the cake and card to their mother. She was so happy. She gave them a big hug and kiss and said, "Thank you." So I can already eliminate that this is not first person, but then I have to think if it's objective, limited, or omniscient third person point of view. So we know someone else is looking in on the story and telling us. We have to determine which character's thoughts we know and how we know that we know those characters' thoughts. What were the clues? What were the thoughts that they had that the narrator told us? So I want you to take a second and think about the clues that are within this passage, and what would you pick? Objective, limited, or omniscient? So it is third person omniscient. And it's because the narrator is not a character in the story. We knew that. All the character's thoughts and feelings are known. Remember, the word omniscient, omni means all, and scient means knowing. So omniscient is all-knowing. We knew Caitlin's thoughts, and we knew Stephen was very excited and what he thought. And we knew Mom was happy. That was a feeling that she had that the narrator told us. So the narrator was all-knowing. And when we have a narrator that's all-knowing, that means they're third person, omniscient, all-knowing.